So I want to talk about something that I think people don't really talk about enough, and that is the difference between like brawler and passive builds. Now in like late game max competitive meta, pretty much everything is a brawler, so you might just assume from that having as many brawlers as possible is going to be beneficial to you. And in a maxed out setting it probably would be. But I think I'm in a good position to kind of explain why that isn't the case for most people, especially in the like earlier mid-game stages. And I'm in a good position because my free-to-play account is actually in one of the worst positions possible. I don't have the legendary tier 7 scouts. My account is not old enough to have access to mods at low rank. For low rank mechs, I have to have my mechs at rank 6 in order to use mods on them. And it is also, clearly a free-to-play account, so I don't have access to like those $5 really good deals. So that's the situation that my free-to-play account is in. It's a great showcase of like why brawler builds are not always the best thing for you, especially if you're in a situation similar to that. So I have in my main hangar, the hangar that I usually use on that account, I have a grand total of 0 in-your-face brawler builds. 0. None of them. I have Revoker in my hangar. It's a really strong weapon, but I do not use it as a brawler. The most like brawler type thing that I have is Overdriver Aegis, which I've been enjoying a bit, but Podgun Aegis is another one that I would consider. And the thing that I've explained this before in streams, but I don't think I've ever made like an actual video kind of going over it. The thing is that you, especially as a free-to-play player, you have to assume, because this is almost always the case, you have to assume that you have the weaker mechs and the weaker weapons and mods, pilots, whatever. You just assume that whatever you have is weaker than whatever your opponents have, because anyone who's willing to spend $5, let's be real, probably can easily get something way stronger than you. And that's not to say people who spend money are evil or whatever. Like, it is what it is, right? So at that point, you can't fight them head-to-head. Someone who has a Revoker Surge, you cannot fight that head-to-head with a Revoker anything, right? Like I said, I do not have access. Well, I have access to them technically, but they're like nearly 10,000 acorns, so essentially I don't have access to them. The legendary scout mechs that do really well with Revokers, and even if I did, they would only be rank 5. I'd have to get them to rank 6 in order to use mods on them. Most people who I fight, even just normally, they have mods on basically every single one of their mechs. So I am at a severe disadvantage in almost every fight that I have, and so I cannot fight them head to head. So what do? I have a hangar. I optimally built it so that I can farm as many kills as possible from a distance and be able to counter everything that I need to counter. So first and foremost, just Railgun Orion counters pretty much everything. If you're in tier 6 or you're around tier 6, even if you're in tier 5, I would get Railgun 8s so that you can then put them on Orion. It is disgusting, and it might take a bit to learn how to aim it. It's going to be difficult to use for a little bit, but once you get used to it, incredible. I'd say about 80% of my matches, I start with Railgun Orion, and I end the match with Railgun Orion. The entire thing, I get like 13 plus kills almost every match. But in the event that my Orion happens to die, I need to have backup builds. And I can't just be throwing myself at the enemy, because I will pretty much guaranteed lose that way. There are a few things that could potentially deal with an Orion, like an Eclipse is probably like the most often one. I could still kill an Eclipse very easily if it doesn't have mods, but very often it does, so sometimes that will end up killing me. But again, if I'm keeping my distance, I don't want to be up close to them. At no point should I be up close to them, right? This goes for anything. This even goes for bots. Like, even the bots, they almost always have stronger stuff than you. People are complaining all the time about, like, oh, the bots are so OP. It's like, stop trying to brawl with them. You will not win. You have less HP, you have less firepower. I don't even know why you're attempting it. The extent to which I am willing to even somewhat brawl with my opponents is inside of an Aegis Dome with Overdriver, and even then, I do not want to be that close. I want to be like at least 30-40 meters away. That's a lot of protection, right? So I'm being very cautious with this. Now, the game does reward aggressive playstyles. It always has. It probably always will. And you might notice I do not have any designated beacon runners in my hangar, right? Like the fastest thing I have is a freaking Lancer, and my Lancer usually stays up in 1 or 2 spots on top of like rooftops or something, right? So it's not doing a lot of moving, and none of my other stuff is particularly fast, so how am I grabbing beacons? The whole thing is you have essentially 2 options. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're up against, you essentially have 2 options. You can either be aggressive and try to grab beacons and try to gain that advantage, or you can be a bit more passive passive and a bit more patient, getting as many kills as possible, you can let them burn through their mechs, let them overextend themselves, so that by the time they get close to winning by influence, basically all of their mechs are dead, and you can then capture as many beacons as you want, kill off the rest of them if you can, but usually I will also have a strong beacon advantage as well. Now, on a lot of maps, my Railgun Orion, because this is usually the thing that I start with, right? My Railgun Orion can usually cover the center, so I can have very good view of the center beacon and make sure that like enemies don't go capture it. I myself will not be capturing it 90% of the time, but I can at least kill any enemies that go toward it, and then my bots can then capture it for me, right? So I am not going to necessarily do it myself because that puts me in great danger, and I am willing to lose it for the sake of not getting myself killed, but there is an extent to which this goes, right? I think that people, when they think of passive builds, I think they lean a little bit too far into like the Helix Rack or Rocket Mortar type territory, where they want to be like ultra passive, and what essentially ends up happening is they get the top MVP, but they only get like maybe 6 kills, and that's just like the extent of their performance throughout the entire match. The thing is that if you're being passive, you have to be raking in kills. You have to be raking in a lot of kills. You need to be able to kill anything that you come across, and you need to be able to do it rather quickly, because again, you are fairly weak. Orion is just one of the greatest things out there for this type of situation, because especially at this SB, none of the bots have mods. You don't have to worry about it. And Orion's ability will more than make up for whatever HP or damage advantage any other mech could possibly have on you. So the only thing you really have to worry about in that case is like stealth, or to some degree, maybe Seeker if you get trapped in a corner. And even still, you can just like walk backwards and then they teleport in front of you, and then you throw the mark, you stasis them. They can't turn around fast enough. You shoot them a couple of times in the back and they're dead. So a lot of it is also like managing your ammo and stuff like that, making sure that you don't run out of ammo too often, because then it makes it easy for people to rush you. But then the rest of the hangar is essentially backup. Like the Aegis Overdriver exists mostly in the event that I do want to be mildly aggro. Like I'm almost never going to start with it, right? So I'm not going to lead with an aggro build. But if after a while, after we kind of break through their defenses a bit, after we kind of weaken them, and Orion again is really great for that because the mark transfer and all that crazy stuff, which by the way, the mark doesn't transfer if the enemies have mods on them. So this is a little bit of a time constraint type thing. So like as soon as the bots start using mods on their mechs, then Orion becomes significantly less useful. But even still, I think it is applicable to a large portion of players anyway. But even disregarding Orion, I have the Graviton Panther to really take advantage of those like wide open maps, especially Imperial Temple. Graviton Panther is absolutely brutal on that map. Railgun Orion not so much, because it does require line of sight and you're in a bit of danger, but Graviton Panther is impenetrable barrier, and you got like damage for days, so you're fine, right? Really solid. The Stormrack Lancer is just for abusing rooftops whenever possible, getting up in certain areas, making it impossible for most things to even hit you, so that also you can get a lot of kills with that if you play it right. It's not one that I'd necessarily start with, at least for me, because I don't have the legendary reload implant. If I did, then it would be a lot better, but I don't, so generally I don't like to start off with it because I find that I can't stack kills fast enough. So usually I will either start with the Railgun Orion or the Graviton Panther, because again, if you're playing passive, if you're not being aggressive for beacons, that means that you're running on an influence deficit the entire match. You have to make up for that with raw kills. You have to force the opponent to be overly aggressive to keep the beacons that they have, and then if they're overly aggressive, they end up burning through all of their mechs, and eventually it becomes an unfair match in your favor toward the end, and then you can turn that around before they win. It's the sort of thing that takes a bit of practice, kind of getting used to knowing when you should and should not move, because, you know, I'm using passive builds, but you have to watch for how many enemies are spawning in, how many mechs do they have left collectively, and using that data to determine when is a good time for you to move for their beacons. Because again, in order to win, you have to turn those beacons around. You have to at least get like 4 cap on them at some point, right? So you can't afford to just stay in the back and kill them the entire match. You have to move up at some point, and knowing when to move up is very important. The Aegis does help with that, and you might think, oh, well, you know, the Revoker Zephyr also helps with that, but actually not. The Revoker Zephyr is there almost exclusively to counter the likes of, like, Nomad or other, like, super tanks. It's very slow, it's very squishy, but it has stupid amounts of firepower. Again, you can't just, like, walk up to somebody and expect to deal good damage to them. And even if you did trade, like, let's say you and your opponent are on completely perfectly equal standings, that simply means that you both kill each other at the same time, and then you die for the sake of one kill, and it's not really worth it. It's not really worth it. So the Zephyr I will use in more enclosed maps. I will use it a little bit more liberally in those maps. But generally speaking, I use it specifically to counter certain things that are causing problems. Revoker Nomad being probably most among them, because it's like the one thing that none of my other builds can really take care of. But it can be very useful against like Seeker or other things as well, right? But the main point is that I'm being careful always. I'm never running up and trying to just head-to-head trade for damage on them, because I will almost always lose in that situation. Which is why I find like Revoker like Slingshot or Revoker Killshot, for example, things that a lot of people use. Oh, that's like... Okay, thanks. Revoker Slingshot or Revoker Killshot that a lot of people use. I think those are kind of a waste of your Revokers. I prefer to use them on Zephyr because Zephyr just allows me 3 seconds of completely free damage. I mean, I have an epic duration plan on there as well, but at least 3 seconds of completely free damage and really, really high damage as well. A lot of people use their Zephyr with like Missile Rack or Storm Rack. Terrible idea. Really bad idea, because those weapons will get the same amount of damage whether you EMP the enemy or not. The EMP allows you as much free damage as you want during that 3 seconds. There's almost nothing that's going to survive 3 seconds of Revoker hits. EMP is just like, it's such a strong status effect, and it's really, really necessary to counter certain things like I mentioned. But those things that you're needing to counter, like let's say a Nomad, you still won't be able to counter them if you don't have the damage output necessary. So I would say unless you have the likes of like Surge or maybe Eclipse if it has mods. If it doesn't have mods, if it's only like rank 5, I probably wouldn't put Revokers on it still. But like Surge can make good use of Revoker always, right? But it's a similar situation, right? Like why does Surge with Revoker work well? Because it has the EMP status effect and it gives completely free damage. Surge has the added benefit of being able to close distances really well, which makes it really good for aggro, but you can use it essentially the same way on a Zephyr. You just cannot aggro with it. Again, should not be aggressive because you're very weak, you're very slow. You're not going to get out of any type of bad situation if you put yourself there. Zephyr's the same situation as Lancer though, where it's not going to get that many kills that quickly because it kind of relies on enemies coming toward it. You can't really kill anything from range. Everything else has at least somewhat of a range advantage. Zephyr does not. And so I won't often start with it. Like the only time that I would maybe even consider starting with Zephyr is on like smokestacks, because if you get to the center, you have pretty much full coverage of the center beacon with the AoE. But even still, I probably won't. It is mostly there to counter specific things and just for me to be able to take it out when I need it to be there. Similar to like Aegis, for example. Right? That's pretty much my thought process for almost every single match, right? The Railgun Orion and the Graviton Panther are my two main starter mechs. If something happens to go wrong right at the beginning, then, you know, I can just spawn the other one. The Lancer I'll usually spawn after those two, or if I think that I want to have rooftop advantage and use that to cover the center beacon, like let's say Imperial Temple, for example. It's a 3-beacon map, so the center beacon is very, very important. Just being able to cover it with the Stormrack Lancer from the top, which is almost unkillable. Like, it's incredibly difficult to even hit it, and I also have mods on it, which makes it even harder to kill. So that is very effective, but again, probably not the first thing I do because it doesn't reload very quickly, and I'm not going to be able to farm kills super great with that. I will last the entire match if I want to with that Stormrack Lancer, but that would actually not be a good thing. Surviving the entire match is not an indicator that you played well. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to scrap your mech and go with something that's better, right? Something that's going to get more kills or get more beacons or help your team out more or whatever, right? Like if I'm using a Panther, I'm trying to use my stasis barrier to help my bots as much as I can because they're stupid and whatever, but you know, every small amount helps, right? But then apart from the Lancer, I also have the Zephyr to counter certain things that might be a problem, especially in more like close quarters maps or close quarters areas of the map. And then the Overdrive or Aegis is almost exclusively for when I decide I want to be a bit more aggro. And that setup specifically, I'm not gonna lie, I think that is like the perfect tier 6 setup. Out of all of your mech options and out of all of your weapon options, I think that that specific hangar is probably the absolute best that you can make for tier 6. Again, Surge and Eclipse are like the 2 strongest mechs in the game, so you want to go for those as much as possible. So don't be dumping a bunch of A coins trying to get that hangar if you could be going for those 2 legendary scouts instead. But I've been having a lot of success with this type of hangar. It just requires being played in a very specific way. It requires patience, first and foremost, but you also need to know when to stop being passive, right? You can't hide in the back the entire match and just farm for kills, because you know, if you don't make that last push right as the enemies are starting to lose a significant number of mechs and they're not able to keep up with your team quite so much, that is the optimal time to be pushing for their beacons. That is when you actually turn the match around. You don't win by kills, you win by beacons, because if they hold too many beacons for too long, you still end up losing, even if you got the most kills. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been sort of thinking about trying to figure out like how to really kind of like explain my thought process behind what builds I'm using and why, and what their functions are, essentially. Every build in your hangar should have designated function. It should not just be there because, oh, it's a good build, because and therefore I have it, right? If it doesn't serve a purpose, if it's not there for a reason, then it's probably not one you should be using, or at very least not one that's going to be very helpful. And again, this isn't going to apply to everyone. So a lot of people have access to mods or low rank mechs, and a lot of people have access to just, you know, better stuff. But I think it's solid advice that pretty much anyone can apply to their hangar or their playstyle if they find themselves being consistently overpowered by their enemies. If their enemies or even just their bots tend to have better mechs, better weapons, better mods, better pilots, whatever, then I think these are strategies worth considering, and adjustments to your hangar worth considering. And it won't be applicable to like maxed meta clan battles or whatever, but I think it is applicable to most players, especially players who find themselves regularly being outclassed by their opponents. If that is you, then I encourage you to kind of rethink your hangar and think more about how you can change it to better serve you from a little bit further range and not necessarily be quite so aggressive. If you do try it, let me know if it worked. Let me know if it helped even maybe a little bit. But otherwise, that will be it for me. Appreciate y'all. Take care.